Okay, we've been for a while doing the Sim Kufi Dal and Kuf Chav Gimel, and we've said all along that at the end, when we finish, we're going to do one thing from Sim Kuf Lamed Hey. We've been throwing in things from other Simanim also to try to sort of get them in here, but there's one thing from Sim Kuf Lamed Hey that we need to talk about, and that's because this question about Scotch and sherry casks makes I would say the most critical part of it is in Sim Kuf Lamed Hey, so we couldn't miss out on talk about that also. Okay, so before we get to today's real topic, I'm going to go over four things that we spoke about in the past that have to do with the Shiloh Sherry casks. There are 4 parts before it that we get to the actual what's today's topic. Okay, so before I'm a little bit jumping ahead of myself. Okay, what's the question? I'm going to repeat the question. The question is, people who make Scotch need to age it for many years in barrels, and lots of those people like to use barrels that had previously held a kind of wine called sherry wine. And the shaila is, does the presence of that stam yayin in the barrels affect the Scotch that you're eating after you're drinking the Scotch, and is it affected by those barrels that are in?
Special on sherry versus any other type of wine, versus
that's what they use. Okay, that's what they use. Okay, so there are four things that we spoke about in the past. I'm just going to go through them quickly, just to remind us or just to get us into the mode. Okay, and the first is like this. Okay, in halacha yud, in kufid halacha yud, we said there's a din which is Tailam b'drabanan. Tailam b'drabanan means is that if you have a shiloh b'drabanan, did something happen or didn't happen, and it could have happened this way, it could have happened that way, so you're allowed to be Tailam. You're allowed to assume that it didn't happen. Okay, that the way the things went were in the more kal way. Okay, the way they would make it mutter. Okay, and so therefore, if you first hear that, you say as well, if you say Tailam b'drabanan, means is if I don't know if mine used sherry casks or not, it's only at most this is drabanan because it's sam yayin. I don't know if it did or didn't use it, and therefore I'm allowed to be Tailam that my people didn't use it. Okay, that's what you would say at your first glance. The problem is that we saw there that no, you don't say Tailam b'drabanan when it's very common to do it a certain way. Okay, and since sherry casks are kind of common, so we don't say that. But then we said that there's a variation of Tailam b'drabanan, which is that when there are specific suppliers who you know those suppliers that they don't do the isser, like there are certain people who sell barrels without isser, then you're allowed to be Tailam. Okay, so this is going to help us. This is only going to help us for cases when we don't know. When we pick up a bottle, it doesn't say if they use sherry, they didn't use sherry. We can assume no, they didn't use it. Okay, because it's a drabanan, we're allowed to be Tailam b'drabanan. Okay, this is one of the things. This point, which is Tailam b'drabanan, is one of the things that Moshe says a bal nefesh should be machmer on. So you should be a bal nefesh should be machmer and not be samach on Tailam b'drabanan. We spoke back then in halacha yud what all the reasons for that is why you should not be Tailam b'drabanan. Okay. That's the first thing. The second one is, there's a version that says that belias of stam yayin are lefgam into anything, into all beverages. Okay, it's a little shiloh if it's all beverages, but we assume it's for all beverages. So if belias of yayin lefgam into everything, so then the wine that's coming out of the barrel is lefgam into Scotch. So we're off the hook. Okay, stam yayin is lefgam. The Gemara says you could do lechachila, you could put other liquids, you can put liquids into that barrel. So what's the problem? So we're off the hook. No problem. It's a very shadid halachic dalet, kufi dalet. That should be straightforward, you know. Excuse me. What's the malashas? It's just a bleed. What else is it? Okay, it's a bleed. So the question on that is the reason why someone will disagree on that is. Diane Weiss brings up such a possibility. He's not convinced, but he says, I hear that the bedafka want the time of the sherry to come into the wine, into the Scotch. So how can you say it's lefgam? The Gemara says it's lefgam in a general sense, but if the guy specifically wants it to be there, how can you say that it's lefgam? How does that make sense to say it's lefgam when he specifically wants it?
Okay. I'm sorry, the barrels before they're moist, they're dry, they're fully dry,
if you touch it, there's nothing on it. There's nothing.
I think they have some of the barrels.
Yeah, that's a separate issue. There might be a little on the bottom is a separate issue. Okay, that's not the big shiloh because it's going to be that little bit's going to be bottle. But the shiloh, the bleed in the barrel, I'm going to back to in a second why there's a big problem with the barrel. Okay, so Diane Weiss says no, maybe it's not lefgam. Okay, so the reasons to argue on that are that Diane Weiss himself says that it's not clear at all that they really want it. Maybe they just want the tom of the wine in the barrel counteracts negative effects of the barrel. Okay, it's not that they go want the sherry. Diane Weiss says, I'm not too sure myself which one it is. That's one angle of it. And Shlomo Miller says, he says, it's very nice that you're telling me that the guy's not the one. The Gemara says it's Tzavkam. The Gemara says it's Tzavkam. So Tzavkam says, no, don't make me crazy. Okay.
They don't just dump a little bit of sherry in?
Sometimes they do into the Scotch.
Why mess around with the sherry casks?
So some say that they use the wine. Well, they need a barrel. And so the wine that's in there counteracts negative parts of the wood. You can't just skip that.
You need the wood also.
Right. Okay, fine. Number 3.
Sure. You're not allowed.
That's correct.
Ireland,
Yes, you're not allowed to put it in also. Okay. Number 3.
They do. They just dump it in the...
Number 3.
Irish.
Number 3. Bitter b'shisha. Okay, this is from Halacha Dalet also. This is from Halacha Dalet also. And that is, Stam Yain is bitter b'shisha. We assume that it applies to all cases. Again, this is a place where Moshe says a Baal Nefesh should be machmer to not say that it applies in all cases. But the Ikar Hadin is that Stam Yain is bitter b'shisha to anything. So you say, come on, so it should be obvious that it's bitter b'shisha because how could it not be bitter b'shisha? Okay.
Anything. I thought it's not like bottle and food and stuff like that.
Again.
Is wine bottle in a cake?
No. In food, it's b'shisha. Correct. No, I'm saying in liquids. I'm sorry. Into another beverage, it should be the b'shisha. It should be the b'shisha into another beverage. Okay. So the reason why the problem with that was that the barrels, the barrels that they use are so thick that there's only 4 times as much liquid inside the barrel as there is barrel. The barrels are so thick; it's about 4 1/4 times. It's a huge. The barrels are made of inch thick wood. You go downstairs to Kiva's office to see it if you want, and they're really thick. And if you do the math, it turns out that it's not Bata B'Shisha even. Okay, so the two. So then, on top of that, another thing is that I told you they use a special wine called sherry wine. The sherry wine is a port. Sherry wine it's sherry together with brandy. So if you make the cheshbon, where we talked about it back then, you may need 11 times to be mevatel it, and you obviously don't have 11. You don't even have 6. So the good news is that a lot of companies don't use first run sherry casks, and we'll talk about later whether they were kosher or they weren't kosher. That's one angle of it. And they add water when they're finished. You have to take it out of the barrel. They add water to it, and between those, in lots of cases, it's going to be batal b'shisha anyhow. Okay, you'll end up with what I meant by kashering is if you only use some new barrels, and some barrels are old enough that they've been kashered in the process. We'll talk about it later. They've been kashered. Then you only bit the b'shisha against a few of the barrels. So we have 1,000 barrels of Scotch, but only 100 of them were in with ones that are trade. Then we may have bit the b'shisha. In the overall batch, we may have bit the b'shisha. Okay.
My bottle of Scotch, since it's combined from many barrels,
all that bleed into this will be batal b'shisha.
First run barrel, what did you say?
First run means it's never been used for anything else. It went straight from the sherry gas straight into the Scotch. If it's been used other times, then it's been kashered by the other uses that it has.
They mix 100 barrels together for each bottle?
Yeah, well, in most cases, they dump all the barrels together into one big vat, and then they start filling the bottles. Okay. 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 So then, and the last thing we took.
You use a barrel,
Lots.
but then it doesn't have a sherry flavor anymore.
Right, because again, if
Because the first time had a lot.
okay, now the last thing is in Halacha Vav we spoke about is that maybe if the Rajma says if you do something on purpose, it can't be batal. So here we're talking about bit the b'shisha, and I'm going to talk about shishim in a second. So the Rajma says that things that are put on purpose can't be batal. In which case, how I'm going to tell you it's going to be batal if the guy wanted it into there. Okay, back to a little what we said before. If you want it on purpose, how can it be batal? So there are two ways of understanding this Rashi. Do we pass like it? The Ramesh says we basically don't pass like it. In very unusual cases, but we do. But usually, we don't. So you pass like the Rashi, so don't worry about it. Things can be batal.
Does that apply to a bliya? Does the Rashi apply to a bliya?
Does the Rashi care in a bliya? You say? That's a good question.
Put something in.
That's a good question. So that again has to do with creeping back into these people's minds. Do they want the sherry to be in your Scotch? If they want it to be in your Scotch, they want it to be there. Maybe then it can't be bottled.
It's still just a bliya. Maybe right.
Okay, that's possible. That's possible. Rav Moshe is not talking about a bliya. Rav Moshe is going to actually put wine into it. That's the shayla he had, is actually putting out that bliya. He's not talking about bliyas. But that's an argument. And Dayan Wright says we actually do pass like the Rajma. He says, but the Rajma is only machmer when the thing itself affects it. If there's shayla of zev zagarim, like in our case, then it's mutter. Rav Schwartz like that was very in favor of that. And Rav Schwartz was big into believing that it's zev zagarim. It has an effect on the flavor, but it doesn't actually make the flavor, and therefore it was mutter. Okay. So that took me longer than I thought, but that was a review of the things that we talked about in the past. Okay, and now for today's Shiloh. Okay, we have wine was in this barrel. Okay, and like I just said to you, the barrel is really thick, and we're thinking about the blear coming from that barrel into the Scotch. So the question for today is there really so much blear coming out of the barrel? Or maybe there's only a very small bleed coming out of the barrel, and if there's only a very small bleed coming out of the barrel, then it's not, forget about the Bashisha, it'll be about the Bashishim. Okay? So is there a lot of bleed coming out of that barrel, or just a little bit? Okay? So to get to that question, before we actually get to the our halacha part of it, we'll step back one step into earlier parts of your day. Okay? And the Shulchan Aruch says, if you have kavach, if you take 2 pieces of meat and you put them into a pot of water, into a bowl of water, cold water, and you put 1 piece of kosher meat and 1 piece of treif meat, and they sit there for 24 hours, there's kavach. And the Gemara says, kavach k'mevushel, kavach is as if it's cooked to the time chances completely. So there's a piece of kosher meat and treif meat floating around in a swimming pool together. The blear from the treif meat goes into the kosher meat, and the kosher meat is as if it was cooked, means it's a full blear. Okay? The Gemara says, kavach k'mevushel, umleach k'reser. Kavach k'mevushel means there's a full blear. K'mevushel, the blear goes all the way through, in contrast to resicha, that's only a small blear. If kavach k'mevushel goes all the way through, okay, the blear goes all the way through. That's the more straightforward thing, that kavach makes blears from food to food. What about from food into a kli? Okay, well, we're talking about our case of the wine sitting in the barrel wasn't food into food. The other side of kavach of food into a kli. Does kavach work into a kli also? Okay, again, the real case of kavach is 2 foods floating around in a liquid. So back in halacha Dalet, I think it was, in halacha Dalet, we spoke about a Rashba, and the Rashba says, and the Taz brings it, who says, no, the blear is only kedei klipa. When it goes into a kli, the blear is only kedei klipa. Okay? Now, if that would be true, according to that way of looking at the bleed is only kedei klipa, then we don't have any problem with our barrels. The bleed into the barrel only goes in kedei klipa. If it only goes in kedei klipa, then that bleed that's kedei klipa is going to be bought the b'shishim into the Scotch. Get about the b'shishim, we bought the b'shishim into the Scotch. We'll be off the hook. Okay? That's what the Raj. We're going to come back to this Raj ben Taz in a while. Okay? But that Raj ben Taz, most Poskim don't buy that. Okay? The Ramah says, it's not a Ramah in Shulchan Aruch, Ramah in Teres Hatas. The Ramah says that just like there's kavach between foods, there's also kavach into a kli, and it goes kedei kula. It goes all the way through a full bleed into the kli. Kavach k'mevushel works for a kli also. Okay, and that's brought by a shach and by everybody else afterwards. Okay, I have here a Prim Gadim and a Chochmatzad and a Aruch HaShulchan, but everybody else, lots of people bring this, that the thing is, like the Teres Hatas says, that a bleed of kavach into a kli is a complete bleed all the way through. Okay, so now we just solved our problem l'chumra. Okay, and everybody passes like that the bleed of kavach is k'mevushel all the way through. If the bleed is all the way through, then the bleed is too much, and it needs to be. Then unless we had a cool like before bit b'shisha, we're gonna be stuck. Okay, I got you guys still. Okay.
You mean like a cooler like bittul b'shisha?
Unless we could have other tzad to be maker, like we said before, maybe there's something to make, maybe the bleed is a lefkam, or the bleed is bit, maybe you say it's bought b'shisha, or something. Unless we have one of these other possibilities, but the fact to say the Teres Hatas says, the Shach brings it, that the bleed is all the way through, so it's bleed through the whole thickness of the wall of the barrel, then it's going to make our food treif. Okay, and now we come to our din. Okay, the problem is like this. Okay, so I just told you, kavach is k'mevushel into a kli, even into a kli, it goes all the way through. The problem is there are 2 dinim right here in Hilchos Klei Yayin.
In a normal barrel is when you don't have shisha in terms of the volume of the barrel versus the...
In a barrel, like a wine barrel?
Yeah.
Right, there's not shisha connected. Right, there's not shisha. But in a pot in your house, it's going to be shisha.
Right.
But they're so thick, there's not... Okay, the problem is there's 2 dinim. One is the din that we started with, and it says like this. It says, I feel about machnis l'kiyim, even when, I'm going to tell you in a minute what a machnis l'kiyim is, even machnis l'kiyim, you leave wine if you have a barrel that was machnis l'kiyim, it's normal to keep things in there for long, extended times. Okay, machnis l'kiyim, the general rule is it has to be there for 3 days. Kindly, when you leave stuff long term, now it's not, the machnis l'kiyim doesn't work like kavach. Kavach, it has to be 24 hours in a row. Machnis l'kiyim doesn't have to be 72 hours in a row. But it has to be basically, you're always keeping stuff in there. So that's Sim Kuflam. Hey has a lot about that. Machnis l'kiyim, ain't it balei yosef de klipa. The bleed of only goes into de klipa. Therefore, l'fika in hiver alei malakid rehitni. If you use a explain, that's what I was looking for. Good to scrape it off. Or kill flame bekardim, or use an axe to cut off a layer. Hosharu. Then you master it. You have a trace barrel. You have a barrel. You scrape off a kadei klipa, one thin layer's worth. You scrape off a layer. You could use the barrel now for kosher. Okay? So that doesn't sound like the bli is all the way through. The bli is on kadei klipa.
Yeah. You see that the Matthias is that the barrels absorb much more.
Okay, so your question, well, wait a second, but when some people have slit open barrels and they saw that it absorbed more, so...
But I'm saying if they dry out, the barrel dries out, then it falls apart. Then it's no longer waterproof.
So you say, but if I cut open, there are people who have cut open barrels and say, oh my gosh, I see red streaks all the way through, all the way deep into it. And you say, and I know it has to be moist all the way through, okay? So the truth is that doesn't bother me. When I see the din, that doesn't bother me. But I'll tell you, the answer to that is that the fact that something that there's
Moisture doesn't mean
that there's something there doesn't mean there's enough to be nice and tam. So when the din says, by scraping off a layer, you've gotten rid of all the important parts. And the fact what's in the deeper is not nice and tam. We don't have to worry about that. Okay, so here it says in Kuflam Hey Gimel, that's what we're poking on that din, that's what we're sitting on this din. It says it's only the Gedei Klipa to the point that you can just literally scrape off a Gedei Klipa and then you can eat it. So, easy, but I told you covers Kamavushal, really? Shulchan Aruch says that you can take off the klipa, and then in Kuf Lamed Zayin it says a different kind of a thing. So of Ketan Shamayim, whatever the case is, Imyesh b'mayim shisha pa'amim keneged klipas hakankan. If the heter is 6 times more than a layer, just a klipa of the kankan, then it's mutter, and then you can eat it. Okay, so both of these dinim are saying is that the blia is only kedei klipa. Right, we're talking about a barrel, and the barrel, the wine sits in the barrel, and the bli is kedei klipa. So, what are we worried about? So if the bli is on kedei klipa, right, I'm not what we're worried about. If the bli is on kedei klipa, what happens to the fact that kavos? Kavos takes 20, in kavos, the bli goes kedei kula. I told you. The Ramaz, the Torah says it, the Shach brings it. So what's going on? Is it kedei kula, kedei klipa? And for us to use nafkamina, if it's only kedei klipa, then it's going to be about the mashishim. Okay, so what's going on here? Okay, this is not my question. Okay, this is the Shach's question. Okay? There's the Shach's kasha. He says, what's going on over here? What happened to the din of Kavash Kamavushal? Why is it these two dinim say that so the Shach's in Kuf Lamed and Kuf Lamed Zayin? He asks, he says, what happened to the din of Kavash Kamavushal? Why isn't it being kedei? Okay, another question the Shach asks. Okay, this is a question he asks. In Kuf Lamed he asks the second question. He says, if you open up Hilchos Pesach, you talk about how to kasher barrels there also. So there, the barrel is not a Shiloh wine barrel. There, it's a barrel that held beer. Okay, so beer is something. So you had a barrel that held beer, and the din is, you could kasher with the same ways that you could kasher klayayin, you can kasher there. It talks about milu v'iri. You can kasher the same ways. So the Shach says, why? Those kind of ways of kashering, there it's called milu v'iri. Those ways of kashering only take off a kedei klipa. It only takes off kedei klipa. How does it help for the beer that was absorbed kedei kulai? It was kavash k'navlosh, the beer is all the way through the whole barrel of beer. So what's going on? So how can you kasher in these? Here's what's happening over here that we're letting you kasher with these ways that only take off a klipa's worth of blia and not a full kashering that you're supposed to do.
What does the Shach get that middle of the year only does kedei klipa?
That's when the din in Kuf Lamed Hey. It tells you, I'm going to tell you in a second, there are 4 ways to kasher these barrels, and they're all equal. They just take off a kedei klipa. They all do the same thing. They get a klipa's worth of blia. There are 4 ways, I'm going to tell you in a minute, or towards the end. So this is the Shach's kasha. He says, in Kuf Lamed Hey, he asks this guy. In Kuf Lamed Zayin is that question. He says, so why by Hilchos Pesach we do the same thing? So here, 2 times in Hilchos Stam Yain, in Hilchos Klayayin does it talk about on kedei klipa, and also in Hilchos Pesach does it do kedei klipa. That's his question. So the Shach says 2 answers to the kasha. Okay, I'm going to tell you the order the way he says it in Kuf Lamed Hey. In Kuf Lamed Hey, in Kuf Lamed Zayin he says the opposite order. Okay, but in Kuf Lamed Hey he says the answer is like this. He says his first answer is it's talking about a case where it didn't sit for 24 hours. If it's machnis l'kiyam means it's been basically in there for 3 days straight. At least 3 days it stays in there. But as I told you before, it doesn't have to be continuous. It could be in and out. It could be in for an hour, out for 5 minutes. That's okay. It doesn't have to be. It has to be basically in there. So it's talking about cases where it was never in for 24 hours straight. But had it been in there for 24 hours straight, then you would need regular kashering hagolah, the whole works. You have to do the whole thing. Okay? Now, as an aside, let's step aside for a second. Well, if it didn't sit there for 24 hours, why is there any blia? Okay? So that, I think what he means is that the din of machnis l'kiyam, this is a special din in Hilchos Stam Yayin, that once you have a treif barrel, if you put something in there even for a minute, we assume that there's a blia. Okay? I think it's exera, it's not really a blia, but we assume there's a blia. So if you put it even for a minute, once you have a treif barrel,
What do you have a treif barrel? This is making the barrel treif. Machnis l'kiyam, you're making the barrel treif right now.
No. It is a barrel that was machnis l'kim. It's a type of barrel that this is halacha gimel, that's simon. If you have a barrel that's machnis l'kim, it's a style of barrel, that a treif barrel is machnis l'kim, the blia that it has is only kedei klipa, and now you want to make it kosher, you could put in mlaka v'hidni. But when it can become treif, it can become treif in less than 20. It doesn't need coverage and things like that. Once it's designated as a machnis l'kim, once it's a machnis l'kim barrel, it's a machnis l'kim, and that's it.
But it's saying
You're not making it a treif, you're making it kosher. It became treif through machnis l'kim.
So when you in the Shulchan Aruch talking about you being machnis l'kim, what?
No. It is a barrel that's machnis l'kim. If that you bought it from a guy as a barrel that's machnis l'kim, it's treif because it was machnis l'kim. You went into a factory, they have tanks that they hold wine in. The tank doesn't sit every minute, it's in and out of the tank, but basically the tank is always full. Okay, so now we have to have a kasher of that tank. It may not have had 24 hours in a row, but it's for days and days and days stuff sits in that barrel.
Okay, so it's Shulchan Aruch saying that.
So, and now you want to make it kosher, so you could take over klipa. The shach says it's talking about a case that it never ever sat there for 24 hours in a row. Okay, so
how would you know that?
So the shach says it says it's obviously a very serious document over here. Okay, we're talking about you have a barrel. Okay, what do you do with barrels? Okay, what do you do with barrels of wine? Stuff sitting there for weeks on end, for months. What is how stuff sits in a wine barrel for? So to say that it's talking about only a very specific case, it's only talking about a case where it was never sat there for 24 hours. How do you know? Who would even say this? Shulchan Aruch should tell you that he's talking about a very specific case. It doesn't say that. It tells you this is hey kasher. This is hey kasher barrel. I'm not very thrilled to say that answer. So he says the second answer. The Shach says the second answer. The second answer is that the rule of kavush k'mavushal, that halacha that we say kavush k'mavushal, has exceptions. We don't say kavush k'mavushal by stam yayin because there are kulas of stam yayin. There are certain kulas about stam yayin. We don't say it by Pesach because at Pesach chametz is terrible. When the chametz was absorbed, it wasn't yet usher. You were allowed to eat the chametz at that point. There are kulas about terrible also. So there are special kulas for certain dinim. So that's why, the din of these ways to kasher are only in klei yayin and in Hilchos Pesach by chametz, but by other things it would not be true. If a regular isser had been sitting in there, I don't know, you think of another isser, klei yakarem, I don't know, but sitting in there, then the isser would be kavush k'mavushal. So usually we say kavush k'mavushal, but here we don't say kavush k'mavushal. Okay, if you want to, we'll say it, because it says it in a certain way. He explains it is that remember. There are people who don't hold of kavush k'mavushal to a kli, right? There are people who don't hold like that. I told you before, the people who don't hold of kavush k'mavushal they'll kavush as k'mavushal in regular things, but into a kli it doesn't work. So for these things we're makel, and we go like those shitas, and kavush is not all the way k'mavushal. It only goes into the klipa.
Meaning the Rajba.
Like the Rajba. We'll say yes, like the Rajba. In these kind of cases, we don't say kavush is k'mavushal. Usually kavush is k'mavushal by Yisurim that are more kal, like this is because it's stam yayin, or in chametz because it's head terbola, we're more kal. So we say kavush is not k'mavushal, and the blia doesn't go in kedei kula. Okay, now, so if that's true, so really we have our regular rules of kavush k'mavushal, and a regular treif tank we would not kasher this way. Like let's say we had cholvak in a tank. Let's say cholvak mazil. I'm sorry, different complication. Okay, we had different isser in a tank that was sitting in a tank. We would not kasher with just a kedei klipa. But when we come to two special kulas of stam yayin, no chametz, we can't be mekel. Which of course, when we get to us, that's what we care about. We care about Scotch, which is sherry. That's only stam yayin. So for stam yayin, we can do kedei klipa. I'm not thinking now about the Kashering even. I'm thinking about the blia. The blia is on kedei klipa. Because the blia is on kedei klipa, it's about the b'shishim. And no, but shishim, there's such a thin amount that it's so little that it'll be about even shishim into the stuff, and there's no reason not to be mekel. Shisha, we had some reasons, Baal Nefesh should be machmir. If it's about the shishim, we're off the hook, but for sure, okay. Okay, now, I told you the way the Shach says in Kuf Lamed Hey. In Kuf Lamed Zayin, he says it in the other order. In Kuf Lamed Zayin, first he says the answer that it's a special kula over here, and then he says, or maybe it's talking about that it never sat there for 24 hours. So that the niggin of that one sounds a little bit like he thinks like the second one is the better answer. Okay, now in the end of the Kuf Lamed Zayin, he says, go look back in Kuf Lamed Hey also. So I'm not very clear from these shachs which way he thinks is the real answer. Which is the real answer? Is he being makel or is he being machmer? Is he makel to say is by stam yayin you don't have to worry about kavush k'mavushal into a kli, or is he saying that it's an unusual case where it didn't sit for 24 hours? Okay, which one is the shach mean to say? So then Yehuda says, okay, yes, you can tell me. So, okay, which one is he? So, again, if you read just Kaf Lamed Hey, you would say that he was being Mako. Because he starts off saying it didn't sit for 24 hours. Then he says, oh, come on, didn't sit for 24 hours? He told me it didn't sit for 24 hours. Of course it sits for 24 hours. So he gives a second teretz as if that's the Iker teretz he's giving. In Kuf Lamed Zayin, the Nigun is the opposite. First he says that it's a cool over here, and then he says maybe it didn't sit for 24 hours. Okay, so that's good. But the Yehuda says, it's going to come in that slide in a minute. The Yehuda says, he says is, the shach seems to be mesupik about it, which way it is, but the ikr comes from a different shach. I'm going to show you that in a second. Okay?
Question real quick.
Yes.
Is that forgive my ignorance, but without any sort of transition or indication of a transition where the person doubts the first answer, is it always the second answer is the better answer than the first answer?
In the way you read Kuflam, it sounds like that. I don't know if it's always like that, but in this case, he says the first answer, and then he says, come on, how can you think this is for 24 hours? I'll tell you a different answer.
Right,
so it sounds like he slugged up his first one. Right, but then when you turn to Kuflam and Zayin, it has a different nick into it, because he says in the opposite order, has a different...
It's not just order, there was something which gave...
Right, there's an in-between, which is he asks a kasha like a pretty straightforward question. Okay, now let's see how other people are. I think the review is going to be the second one on here. Okay, but anyhow, so a lot of the achronim that I see, think that it could be Meko. Meko, we get to say, is that by Stam Yayin and by Chametz, it's only Kedei Klipa, and by other resources it will be Kedei Kula. The first is the Shach. Oh, here it is. This is the Shach in Sifkat and Yud Gimel. This is an earlier Shach, which the Rebbe brings. And he says like this. He says, Dafka b'shloi hoya b'yayin nesach me'es leis. Whatever the case is over there. Avol hoya b'me'es leis. Excuse me, what happens if the wine sat there for 24 hours? Ain't chilik between this and whatever. A lot of tzarich mila v'iri. You just could do the kinds of kashering that are going to be later in Kuf Lamed Hey, which on Kedei Klipa. Over there in the din, in Sifkat and Yud Gimel was the case you don't have to kasher at all. He says, but if it's sat there for 24 hours, then you do have to kasher. But what's the end of saying is you have to kasher? Does he have to kasher? Through mila v'iri, this light kashering that just takes off Kedei Klipa. Maybe he brings this, and he says, you see from here that the Shach held the real answer was to be Mekel, that by Stam Yayin, even if it sits for 24 hours, you're okay. Okay, that's the Nebuchadnezzar's right from the Shach. Okay, the Pri Megadim says, this is in Kuf Hey. He says, in the Kli Shach Kvisha L'Gamri, Ken Aloha. Okay, I asked you a question earlier whether there's Kvisha in the Kli, whether Kavish Kavusha works in the Kli or just in foods. He says, yes, it goes Kedei Kula. The Chen Kazar Shach B'Tzad Diches Yud Gimel, that's the Shach who brings the Teretz Chadash, Nekama. Over Kuf Lamed Hey, Ois Lamed Gimel, that's our Shach that we're talking about. In Kuf Lamed Hey, he says, the Ein Lomo Miyayin Neser Ein Sham. I told you there's a rule that Kavish is Kavush even to a Kli Kavushal, and if you look in the Shach and Kuf Lamed Hey, you'll find out that Yayin Nesach is different. You're looking Shach Kuf Lamed Hey Lam Gimel, where you'll see that Yayin Nesach is different. Okay, even though usually Kavish is Kavushal with Gamri, it makes a full blia, but Yayin Nesach is special. Yayin Nesach doesn't have that din. In other words, the more cow way that the Shach had answered, well, to us, the cool way, which is that even if it sits for 24 hours, but Yayin it doesn't have a blia. The Chacham Tzvi says, now the Chacham Tzvi comes from a different angle. He says, he thinks the Shach is machmir. He says, V'av sheharad b'Shach, kotzad dod avol b'ishtayim eis eifini k'mavusha mamish. That's the first answer of the Shach. Even though the Shach says that if it's meisleis, v'chilas kvoidei loidak. Okay, and then he goes on to explain to you why he thinks the Shach is wrong. So the Chacham Tzvi actually thinks the Shach is machmir, but the Chacham Tzvi himself says, I don't agree with him. Okay, that's a different angle on it. The first two were agreeing with the Shach, but he doesn't agree with the Shach. Okay, next. The Rebbe Yehuda. Okay, this is the Rebbe Yehuda I told you before. He said, if the wine would tip to me ace, it needs irui, that means mila v'irui. Ayin Shach Sifkat Yud Gimel. Sifkat Yud Gimel, that's the Shach that I brought to you beforehand. Sifkat Yud Gimel is the one that says that if it sits for 24 hours, it's real. What did I got here? Hagam shebesifkat and chavdala, besifkat and lam gimel, chonchik bazeh, shafilu iru loy mahani, that iru doesn't help if it sat there for 24 hours, and kamakal dvar shebesifkat and yud gimel, hein dik ladina, which is that for wine is a special din, that even if it sits for 24 hours, there's no kavush, it's not kamavushal, it's just kedei klipa. And the Mishabura says, and I told you that then, let me take it back for a second. I told you this in Hilchos Pesach, it says that you could kasher barrels that held beer, you could kasher them with what's mila v'yirui. So Mishabura says, he says, that's true only by beer. But that's a shach and Kuf Lamed Hey. The Bashar Yisur ain't l'hakalai the Ir Gimyan. You can't do that because you can only do it by certain Yisurim. For all the Kalim, it does not help because Kashrus is Kamavusha Kadei Kulai, and therefore the bleed goes all the way through. So this Kula that you're seeing, if you open up Hilchos Pesach and Taf Namala, you see you can kasher barrels with Milu V'ir from beer. He says, don't get confused, it's only for Pesach. This din only applies to Pesach, doesn't apply to other dinim, which is, again, what the Shach says by us, the Tzad L'Haka by the Shach, who said that it's only a special Kula for Stam Yain and for Chametz, but for other Yisurim it would not work. Okay? And then, what I don't have on the screen, it was too long, is the Chazon Ish. Okay? The Chazon Ish says, he says he really doesn't understand the Shach's first answer. The first answer the Shach said that it wasn't sitting for 24 hours. He says, I don't understand. If it didn't sit there for 24 hours, if you're being told, okay, well, that's one question. I'm not going to say that. And he says, like the Shach's question himself, he says, who are we kidding that it wasn't there for 24 hours? He says, it's a barrel holding for long term. Okay? So the Chazon Ish says that we follow, that for Stam Yayin, we follow the Shittas Rishonim Meko to say that, Bliya is only Kedei Klipa. Now, I have to tell you something. When I told you beforehand that the Rajba and the Taz say that the Bliya is only Kedei Klipa, the Bliya is not Kedei Kuloi, I said it to you, one way of reading them. You could also read them to say that they themselves are only being made by Stam Yayin. Okay? It may well be that they were only being made by Stam, they themselves are only made by Stam Yayin. Meaning, I presented it to you as if the Rajba and the Taz say, Kavish into a Kli is not at all, it's just Kedei Klipa. And everybody else argues on them. You could well read into the Rajba and the Taz that to only be made by Stam Yayin in itself. That's the whole Kula is by Stam Yayin. The other Dukim Taz is there. He might only be saying by Stam Yayin.
But Shachwash we still need, it's not Stam Yayin.
Right. We still need a regular Kashering. So if that's what they mean, then the Chazon Ish is saying, basically what the Shach is saying is, everyone's one big happy family. Okay? Everyone agrees with each other. We usually say Kashrus Kavavushal, by Stam Yayin, we don't say Kashrus Kavavushal. Okay. So now all these people who I just told you are Mekel, all these people I told you are Mekel, I'm sorry, one more. The Magen Avraham is also Mekel. Okay, seemingly the Magen Avraham is also Mekel, like this more Tzad from the Shach. All of this is very nice, except for one person, okay, that we know of. Okay, and that is the Chacham Tzaddik. The Chacham Tzaddik says, it's Chacham Tzaddik by us, says, you should be Machmir, and if it's sat for 24 hours, you should do a regular Kashering. He says, if there's a Tzarech Gadol, then you could follow the Shita of the Mekim. Okay, that's what reminded me of the Magen Avraham. He said, he in parentheses says, look at the Magen Avraham. Okay, so the Chacham Tzaddik, even I just told you a whole long list of people who said you could be Mekel. The Chacham Tzaddik says that you should be Machmir, except there's a Makom Tzarech Gadol, I think his words are, then they should be Machmir. Okay, they should be Mekel. Okay, so, and in contemporary people, Rabbi Shechta says, everybody's always Mekel about this. I don't know what, he wasn't so sure what the question was.
Mekel about what?
About the Shiloh and the Shach. Should the
Which application?
For whiskey, for drinking Scotch. Scotch and sherry cans. That's the application that we Lamaisa people have. Okay, and Rabbi Niehaus reports that Rabbi Heinlein tells them, no, the minig is to be machmer. I'm not sure. I hate to say what that is. I guess it depends where you drink on Shabbos. But
so Rabbi is saying there's no Shiloh and Scotch.
So
So the only thought is it's accepted law. Is that how you read it?
He says he has some possibilities of why Abal Nevis should maybe think about being machmer. But right, according to what we're talking today's topic, according to this, that the Brizon Kedei Klipa, like the Shach in one answer says, and like all these other people said that the Brizon Kedei Klipa, then they're going to talk about it because it's about the Shishim. Nothing about Shisha, all kinds of fancy, complicated stuff. It's a nice time. Nothing about the Shishim. It's a tiny little bliya. It's about the Shishim. We're good.
You don't know what the Raspberry says. You don't purpose.
So we have to think about that, Raja. Maybe he did on purpose. And I told you, Moshe said, don't worry about that, and Daimai says not to worry about that. Okay, so now all of this that I told you now, that was the main part of today. There's one little side part to this also. That is, I mentioned a few times already, that in Tim Kuf Lamed Hey, it tells you 4 different ways to kasher barrels. Okay, and I'm going to tell you those 4 ways in a second. Those 4 ways are dependent on this question in the Shach. Meaning, are those 4 ways only if it didn't sit for 24 hours, but if it was covered for 24 hours, then you have to do a full Hagala? Or is no, these 4 ways work even if even if it sat there for 24 hours, you still could do those kashrings. Okay, why do I care? I'm going to tell you the 4 ways, and you'll see why we care. Okay, so the first one way is Milu V'Yuri. Milu V'Yuri means in short, means that you put water into there for 24 hours. at least 24 hours. Then you empty it out, put it the second time and a third time. Do it 3 separate times. That counts as milav iri, and the kli is kosher. Okay? We hold that you don't have to do milav iri just with water. You can do it with anything, almost anything, as long as you don't use the same material that was in there originally. What the issue was, you have to use a different type of material. Okay?
This is a Shulchan Aruch.
This is Shulchan Aruch.
The Shulchan Aruch is telling you how to kasher the barrels,
Yes.
and it doesn't say if it was there 24 hours or not.
Doesn't say. No, the whole siman says machnis lakim, things that sit for days on end, and it tells you one of the ways kasher is milav iri. It's the shach says that's why the shach is about the whole siman. It's like something seems missing over here.
You have to say that whole sim is somewhere wasn't there 24 hours?
The kashering parts of it. Yeah, well, the kashering part says that's what the shach. That's what I said to you. The shach says, he says, this doesn't make any sense. His first answer, it wasn't there for 24 hours. He says, really? How can it be? Like, why? And if it was, how can the shach not say that?
It's beyond ludicrous. Right?
Okay, so the shach is not as dramatic as you.
Yeah, I'm still going to tell you how to kasher barrels that things were sitting in.
So the shach.
I'll tell you one time that only if it wasn't there 24 hours, it's ridiculous to say it was just 20. It was the whole thing. It's something that wasn't there 24 hours. It's not possible.
Okay, so that you say it in a more dramatic way, and the Chazanish and the Shach say it doesn't make sense. How can you say that's what we're talking about? That's what they say. So, but again, the people who are being machmir are saying is the passing like that answer of the Shach, which he said first, that first answer of the Shach, which was it wasn't there for 24. The whole thing was not 24 hours.
So maybe it's the halacha what machnis lakim means. But if you have just a general thing, if I buy barrels in the market that held stam yenam and this is how you cash them.
Okay, no. So yes, you could to your son's wedding, you could bring the stuff with sherry in it because it's much right. That's correct. Right. So you're allowed to do milav iri with other liquids. You can do milav iri with other liquids. So that means is that if you have a sherry cask that was used enough times, it was used enough times, it will be kashered. Wait. The scotch that's in there kashered. I put in scotch there for a month. Scotch for a month. That's one filling. Okay. So that's right. So what I'm saying, where is it? If we take the tabahakal, it's clear, but then not only are we off the hook because it's bottle, but we also potentially kasher our barrel also. So we're getting it from 2 angles. Okay. We're getting it from 2 angles. Not only is it bottle into our food, but it was kasher also, yes.
And you also have the
I'm putting it on purpose.
Right.
Because he was kashered it to the God. Right, so we say that if we say we kashered it, then no one was trying to put it on purpose. It's gone. Okay, that's one thing. Okay, the second way to kasher is, I said to you, you could scrape off a layer. That's what we've been talking about all day. The third one is, you could do liban kal. Okay? And liban kal means is, you put a fire onto the inside of the barrel, and if it's so hot that when you touch the outside, it's yatzaleh display. Okay, when you touch the outside of the barrel, the heat has penetrated the barrel to the point that it's yatzaleh display, that's considered a kasher. Okay? So, in fact, when they want to use a sherry cask for holding scotch, that's what they do. They do something called charring. Okay? They put a fire inside of it. Okay? So when you watch them do that, it's very dramatic, and it looks like, of course, it's yatzaleh display. But Rabbi Nihal says, if I remember correctly, he's touched it, and other people have as well.
He did it with the pencil, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, the pencil, I don't remember which way he did it, and it's not yatzaleh display. Okay? It's 60 miles for a second. The barrel's very thick.
What do you do with a pencil?
We have crayons that melt at certain temperatures.
Oh.
So it's not yatzaleh display. Okay? It doesn't get to be yatzaleh display on the outside. It goes in for a second. So even though it looks very dramatic and it looks like it would work, but Lamaisa, it doesn't work for that. But the good news is that even though it doesn't work to be liban kal, but it may burn off a kedei klipa's worth. Remember, scraping off a kedei klipa makes it mutter. So the charring may not be liban kal, but the charring very likely burnt off a kedei klipa.
Burn it off. Burn it. Burn it off.
Burn it. You think that's better or worse?
It's sitting there. The ash is sitting there. I'm saying it didn't come
Okay,
off.
well, the ash that's sitting there is gone. I mean, I don't have to worry about the bliyah from there.
Okay.
And the last way the kasher is with iru klirushin.
Yeah, if you're going to have the town of sherry that comes out of the charred wood.
Right, so that's what we're saying. It's kasher. No, it's not going to come out.
No, I'm saying forgetting about.
What are they going to think this town?
Even if it's kedei kulos, once it's charred.
There's only a layer of char. The rest of the barrel is
Anything
there.
that comes out, it's going to taste like char, no?
I'm not an expert. I can't say that part. I'm not a sherry drinker. Okay. Anyhow, the last is that you could also kasher with iru klirushin. You could kasher with iru klirushin also, but the Rama tells you whatever. It's very complicated because think about it, it's the inside of a barrel. It's hard to get inside of a barrel and do iru on every spot. So whatever the Rama talks about, potentially ways that you could do that. but that's not realistically, that's not the way. We use Iri Klirishin to do these types of kashrus. That's the truth. If you use Kula V'Shach, there are ways we can kasher with Iri in different ways, but in the barrel itself, it doesn't work so well.